Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Gray Knight again. Today we're going to talk about Biden's immigration policy, and boy, I know I'm going to get in trouble for this one. This is the one where I'm expecting someone's probably going to call me a racist because I'm not for open borders, and I'm about to pretty heavily criticize Mr. Biden, who apparently is. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit too about healthcare in this, but not a whole lot because I think that warrants its own video. Anyway, immigration. For the past 4 years, it's been Trump's policy to tighten restrictions on, or to tighten enforcement against illegal immigration and also tighten restrictions on legal asylum seekers and other folks attempting to immigrate to this country. Um, I'm going to come out and say I don't have a problem with legal immigration at all. As long as the person who comes here can pull their own weight, I'm in favor of immigration. Um, I think that's fine as long as they can pull their own weight. And what do I mean by pull your own weight? I mean you are able to earn enough that you can pay your own bills and take care of yourself without expecting to be supported by the government. The other thing that I would say that I believe in is the idea that if you're going to come to the United States, you should assimilate to the culture and become an American. It shouldn't be a revolutionary idea. It certainly shouldn't get one labeled racist. If you go pretty much anywhere else in the world and attempt to immigrate, it's expected you will become assimilated to that culture. You live in the United Kingdom, they expect you to learn to live like a British person. You go to Germany, you live like a German. You go to Russia, you live like a Russian. You go to Saudi Arabia, you live like a Saudi. That's pretty much how it works around the rest of the world. Why it's become um, such a dirty word to say assimilation about America really escapes me. I'm not suggesting that you don't keep your family traditions. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't be allowed to keep cultural traditions that you have as long as they're not incompatible with American law and the American way of life. And I think that should be defined. When I say not compatible, I mean in the most narrowest sense. I mean, if you come from a culture, for example, that practices female genital mutilation, obviously that can stay where you left it. That doesn't need to come over here. It's as far as I'm aware, it's illegal in the United States pretty much everywhere. Certainly on a child, it should be illegal. And if an adult woman decides to voluntarily undergo that, that's her. I think that's her prerogative. And we are a free country, and in that situation, yeah, that's fine. You want to do that, you're an adult woman and you want to seek that procedure out. That's fine. But as to doing it on underage girls who are not old enough to provide consent, no. I view that in the same category as letting a young child get a tattoo or a piercing. And I'm not talking about the ears. I mean like a body piercing. No. Um, and no, I don't think the parents should be able to volunteer them for that either. And but barring things like that, fine. I don't have a problem with the person wanting to maintain their culture. Again, as long as you don't have compatibility issues. However, I think coming to the United States and expecting everyone else to bend over backwards to accommodate you is unreasonable. Um, I mean, if you don't like American culture, what in the hell are you doing moving here? And again, that shouldn't be a radical thing to say, and yet somehow it is. And I'm sure I'm going to get called racist for saying this. I don't care where you came from. I don't. I mean, I would say the same thing to somebody who comes from the United Kingdom. If you come from the United Kingdom and you want to live and you don't want to come and live like an American, you want to live like a Brit, well, then what the hell did you come here for? That makes no sense. Um, I mean, I get it, land of opportunity and blah blah, and you're right. You have a lot more freedom here and upward mobility. But to think that that's not somehow part of, that's not somehow a product of the American culture, which uh, is for the most part a pretty open and accepting culture where it's live and let live is the attitude of most people. There's a minority in this country that does not believe that anymore, and that's something that's probably going to be a discussion for another video. But the majority of America is very much about live and let live. You leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. I don't care. You want to, do live however you want. And yeah, you got these people who want to push things like, well, Sharia law is bad, blah 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 blah. Um, I think that mostly what that is a product of folks who are concerned, rightly or wrongly, about having strict Muslim religious law applied in the civil realm and invading their freedom. And when you consider that you have some folks on the left who have this same concern about Christian biblical law being applied against them to prevent them from living their lives the way they want, I don't necessarily think that it's completely unwarranted. And it's not bigoted. It's just, it's just like, look, don't push your religious values on me. And as a country, that's written into our Constitution. That's what the First Amendment Establishment Clause is all about. You don't get to push your religious values on other people using the force of government. Nor should your religious values be an excuse that somehow gets you out of a generally applicable criminal law either. I mean, that's, again, it's well established. Now, that's what I have to say about legal immigration. Illegal immigration is another thing. You can talk about our policies for letting people into the country or not are overly strict. I don't know that I would agree with it. They are or aren't, but that's not the same thing as saying that it doesn't justify not enforcing existing law, and it doesn't justify giving a free pass to someone who's been already caught breaking existing immigration law. This should not be controversial to say this. Biden's policy here, he goes through a lot of things he criticizes Trump for, and then turns around and says, "Well, I won't do that." Examples would be like separating kids from their parents, making it more difficult to come in as a refugee, requiring people to show that they can pull their own weight before they can get a visa or a green card. And Mr. Biden is also going on record as saying he believes that benefits should be extended to non-citizens. And this kind of hints around about it, but essentially that's what this is saying when it says that they shouldn't be denied entry over those kind of benefits. Here's the problem. Number one, if you have laws, they should be enforced. If the law is serving to work an evil, well, that's a good argument for getting rid of it. I guess in the extreme, the citizens should fight against a law that serves to work against an evil. I would agree with that. That is not this. I'm sorry, it's not. Because a lot of the arguments about this is bad and that's bad and this is being handled wrong, they don't come out and say it, but it's predicated off this idea that somebody who was born in another country is not in any way connected to this country. They're not a citizen. They're not a legal resident. The only connection they have with the United States is that they want to live here because it's a better place to live than where they live, wherever they were born. And these arguments are essentially predicated off the idea that someone who wants to come here has a right to be here. They don't. I'm sorry, they don't. Even if you want to argue about asylum, like a situation where the person's in danger, essentially asylum is us granting a gracious gift to someone who finds themselves in a difficult circumstance. It is not a right. It's not. Nor should it be viewed in that light, and here's why. The moment you start saying it's a right, then you are essentially saying that citizenship and nationhood mean nothing. I mean, what is the benefit of being a citizen If anyone who decides one day, wakes up, for whatever reason decides they want to live in America, what is the difference between that person and a citizen if you're not going to say citizenship grants you rights, and without it you don't have those rights? I mean, I do think that someone who is physically present in the United States should certainly be afforded certain protections under the Constitution in the criminal context. I don't think that, for example, the police should be allowed to beat a confession out of someone because they happen to be here illegally. I would agree with that. I think they should be given counsel just like anybody else. I'm fine with that. But when you're talking about the right to come in and reside here and collect benefits that cost money, because these benefits aren't free. I mean, they cost money, and at the end of the day, the money that they cost is money that comes from the taxpayer. And we already have enough of a problem making ends meet just taking care of benefit commitments to our own citizens. But long and short of it is, a lot of this is predicated off this idea that someone who has come in here illegally or attempted to come in here illegally has rights, has a right to be here. And I would vehemently disagree. I would vehemently disagree that someone who has no other connection to the United States other than that they want to be here somehow has a right to be here if they can just jump through the right hoop or fit their name into the right box. I disagree with that. I do think that if there is a law that establishes a procedure whereby we would admit someone in here if they meet those standards, that should be followed, and I think it's reasonable for anyone applying to demand that existing procedure be followed. However, if the procedure's changed, then as long as it was done in a lawful way, I don't really see where anyone has a right to complain. And if you don't like the procedure, then don't submit yourself to it. It's very simple. I want to start by talking about like children being separated from parents. I agree, that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. Here's the reality: that very same tragedy happens to children of parents that get themselves involved in the criminal justice system all the damn time. Nobody is seriously suggesting, or I surely hope not, and the way things are going lately, I would say this with an asterisk, but no one's suggesting that a parent shouldn't be accountable for their criminal activity, up to and including incarceration, if that's what the statute calls for, and they're convicted and sentenced just because they're a parent, and that would end with them being separated from their child. That's a tragedy, absolutely. But the adult bears some responsibility for their decisions in life. If you break the law, yeah, you're going to get separated from your kid. That kind of is what happens. Now, I don't like that they're separating them and then the kids get lost in the system. They need to do something about tracking that better. And ultimately, as Eisenhower put it, the buck stops at the Resolute desk. That would be the president. And I agree with that. And that's something that should be fixed. We should not be losing any children in the system. There should be a way to track them, and there should be a way for them, assuming that the parents are otherwise not being incarcerated or dealt with by the legal system, to be reunified. But let's not pretend like this is something. One, it's not new. This goes on all the damn time, and from what I understand, the separation of parents and children was also happening under the Obama regime to the extent that, the Obama administration. That was a Freudian slip for you. Under the Obama administration, the same thing was happening when he chose to deport when people got picked up at the border, if they weren't doing catch and release, the same thing was happening. And it happens all over throughout the criminal justice system all the damn time. Is it sad? Absolutely. But let's take a breath and look at what it really is. And let's assign responsibility where it belongs. And that is, if you are going to come here illegally and you get jammed up in the system because you tried to sneak across the border, guess what? You're going to get separated from your kid. Now, as to the ones who are coming to the border and surrendering for asylum, well, that's a really good argument for Trump's policy of, great, stay in Mexico while we process your papers. If we determine that you should get asylum, well, then we're going to come and get you and let you in. Because then there's no need to separate parents and children. But of course, Biden opposes doing that too. Biden apparently, from what I can gather, wants to take us back to catch and release. Well, that doesn't work. Because what happens? You let them in, they go out in the community, and they disappear. And if you determine later that this person, in fact, is not entitled to asylum and is not entitled to entry as under some other visa program where they can have residency, then you have the problem of going and finding them. And then, of course, if it's a workplace raid or some other kind of a raid, everybody howls about these ICE raids. The simplest solution is don't let them in until you're sure that they're going to fit into one of these legal categories. If you don't like the way the legal categories work, that's an argument for reforming the laws. But, you can't just expect to just let people loose in the country who came up here just, I don't care if they are asylum seekers. That's not reasonable. It's just not. And while we're on the subject, let's talk about health care real quick. Well, Biden's gone on record saying that he believes that non-citizens should be able to get government-funded health care, and he wants to do a public option. And I can talk about all the problems with a public option in and of itself, and there are numerous ones, and I think there's a pretty good example of why that wouldn't work out so well in this country in the form of the VA, but I think that's a topic for another video and another day. What I'm going to say about that, and all I'm going to say about that is, if you are going to do any species of socialized medicine, whether it's private company insurance subsidized by the government, or whether it's a public option, or some kind of a hybrid or something, again, this costs money. Someone's going to pay for it somehow. If you want to do that, you cannot have unfettered illegal immigration, because it's going to break the system. This costs a ton of money to do this. Most countries that have socialized medicine don't give it to non-citizens, one, and two, they are, for the most part, pretty stringent about illegal immigration. They don't tolerate it. They'll send you to prison for that if they can't deport you. I mean, Australia is extremely strict about that. They'll send you to a labor camp. And no, you don't get it if you're not a citizen. You're not getting their socialized medicine. Same thing with New Zealand. Same thing with the UK. If you're not a citizen, it's cash and carry. We don't even do that. I mean, if you show up in the ER, and if you don't believe me, you can go test this sometime. If you show up in the ER sick and ask for help, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a life-threatening illness. Essentially, if you show up there and say, I've got a bad headache, or I got a fever, I got the sniffles, I got a cough, fill in the blank, they will see you, and they will treat you. Now, you're going to end up with one whale of a bill later, because most emergency rooms these days, in my experience, it's about $1,000 walking in the door. But you will, in fact, receive treatment. They're not telling you, well, if you can't pay, goodbye. So it's not truly cash and carry. Because if it was truly cash and carry, then you would basically be SOL if you go in there and don't have money and don't have insurance. But yeah, if you start giving this out to people who are non-citizens, what you're going to do is break the system. If you start giving it to people who claim here illegally, that's going to have exactly the opposite effect of discouraging that. It will encourage people to try to sneak in here. I will say I disagree with Trump building the wall. I don't think that the existing physical barrier should be torn down, and I don't see Biden calling for that either. He wants to cut the money off for building more, but you know what? Whatever. I honestly don't have that much of a problem with that, because I think that the reality is you can put up all the physical barriers you want on the land border, assuming you were able to successfully create a physical barrier that was extremely difficult to breach. It's not going to stop people from trying to come here. I mean, we get illegal immigration out of Cuba, and Cuba doesn't have a land border with us. These people will come across the Caribbean Sea or across the Gulf of Mexico to get into the United States because they're that desperate. And life here is from their viewpoint is a hell of a lot better than life in Cuba, so they're willing to risk their lives on the open seas to come to the United States. My point is, if people are that desperate that they're willing to walk across the desert in states like New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas, where they risk their lives doing it, I don't think that a barrier is that having to sail across the ocean is necessarily going to be a deterrent. Personally, I would favor the use of attrition. What do I mean? Well, specifically, what I'm talking about is removing the benefits that make people want to come here illegally. I think incentivizing people to come here who are going to be able to contribute is a good thing. And that's fine with me, as long as they come here legally. But anyone who's going to break the law and come across the border without authorization, they should be able to get nothing. No benefits. And honestly, I would also take this as far as enforcement with people who are already here. I'm not a big fan of the workplace raids. It has its bad optics. It gets a lot of bad press, and if anything, the bad press makes it harder for federal law enforcement to do their damn job. And it's also 100% unnecessary. You want to deal with people coming here illegally. This is what you do. One, you start, instead of arresting people at job sites, what you do is you send somebody there with a clipboard and a counter to go do, and just check everybody's ID and do a head count. Figure out how many people are there and how many of them are illegal. Don't arrest anybody who's there illegally, but just get a tally. And then you just fine the ever-loving bejesus out of the employer. And as I understand it, there are federal laws that already permit this because it's a crime to hire somebody illegally. So that's what you do. And you force the employer to still pay them for whatever work they did. I mean, they get paid, and they get paid at whatever the normal rate would be, not some cut rate, because a lot of these folks are, from what I understand, and if I'm wrong about this, my apologies. I don't think I am. These businesses are hiring them for less than minimum wage. So what I'd do to them is, first of all, I'd force them to pay them back fully what they would have earned doing that job at the market rate, not even at minimum wage. Whatever the going market rate is for somebody legal. So in other words, if it's a union state, you're going to pay a union wage. I'd force them to pay that, and then I would fine the crap out of them for each and every one of their employees that was here illegally. And I do it on a per employee basis based on the number of employees and the number of days each employee was on the payroll, and I'd fine them for each and every one of those days. And if you need to modify the laws to be able to do that, fine. Unless they have a legit argument that they really didn't know. In other words, if you're dealing with somebody with fraudulent papers, and then in that case, that person should get prosecuted for a felony for committing fraud. But assuming you're not dealing with a situation like that, if they knew or they had reason to know, then I'd just fine the crap out of them. Because what you're doing with that is you take away the profit motive for them to hire illegals, and they'll quit doing it. I would do the same thing to landlords that let to them. If you get caught knowingly letting, or where you should have known, and you let to somebody who is here illegally, get fined, and you get fined hard. And if you can't pay, then I would give the government the ability to put a lien against your property and foreclose a lien. Those two steps right there, plus making sure that you tighten the belt on any kind of public welfare benefits, where and the way I would deal with this is because it's most welfare is for the most part like a combination state and federal deal. I'd make a condition of getting any federal block grants for welfare that the states have a means of identifying and removing from the welfare rolls anyone who is on the rolls who is not here legally. Or a simple way would be just if you're not a citizen, you're not allowed to be on the rolls, period. But you could do it just with legal status or not. I would also take away federal highway money from any state that issues driver's licenses to people that are here illegally. If you take those kind of steps, you make it a difficult enough circumstance to try to live here that I think you get a lot of these folks to just pick up and go home. And you don't need to do a lot of these aggressive enforcement measures. To the extent that reform needs to happen to the immigration system, I really feel like it needs to be in the direction of people who can pull their weight. Don't care what part of the world they come from, but I think, it should be based on education and or needed skills. And people who should get priority should be on, if you're not related to somebody that lives here, and when I say somebody that lives here, I mean basically, I would say like a first degree relative of a citizen or somebody who's on track to become a citizen. That would be things like parents, siblings, children, obviously, maybe grandparents or grandchildren. If you're going to go out beyond that, I would probably say that one or two circumstances needs to exist. Either one, a person can pull their weight, or two, you can show conclusively that you're able to support that person completely without government assistance of any kind. And yeah, that's harsh. I agree. But, we don't need to be importing people to go on the welfare rolls. And it shouldn't be a race issue because, from my perspective, it's not. I don't care which part of the I don't care what part of the world you came from. I feel the same way about people from Europe. If you can't pull your weight, we got enough of our own people here who were born here and are citizens that don't pull their weight. We don't need to be importing more people who do that. And I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know. I don't have the exact numbers on that, but I think the numbers, if they're any higher than 0, unless it was something that happened through no fault of the person coming here, like they got injured on the job or something, then, any number higher than 0 is too high. If you're knowingly importing people that can't pull their weight and where there's no one here that's going to support them. And when I say no one here that's going to support them, I mean like private citizen, like a family member. And I think anything higher than 0 is too high. I don't think we need to be giving away health care because it's going to attract more law breaking. Biden wants to preserve DACA. I think that will also encourage more law breaking, but I also see a separate problem with DACA. DACA was Obama's little I have a pen and I have a phone measure when he couldn't get the DREAM Act through Congress. And the reason he couldn't get the DREAM Act through Congress is you had enough people in Congress who recognized the inherent problems with that idea. Yes, I agree. Folks that were brought here as children illegally are sympathetic, and the child surely did not choose to break federal immigration law if they came here with their parents. That's true. The problem is, if you give anyone in that circumstance amnesty, what does that do? It encourages the parents of young children, to try to sneak in here and bring their kids in the hope that the kids will get the same benefit and then they get to stay because they're the parents. It rewards law breaking on the part of the parents. and it will encourage more law breaking. And for that reason, I don't think it needs to be a policy. As for DACA, DACA was done by executive fiat. And even if you think that these children should be allowed to stay, if you think it's okay for a president to just wave a wand at an existing statutory law, and because he or she doesn't like the effect of existing statutory law, if you think that that's okay, you're basically again encouraging lawlessness on the part of the president, and also you're saying the president can behave as a dictator, because that's what that is. DACA should not exist. If you believe that that children who were brought, or adults in many of these cases, who were brought here with their adult parents illegally should get amnesty, fine. Call your congressperson and tell them to pass a law. DACA is not okay. That was done illegally. It was done without authority, and really, it's a nullity from a legal standpoint. If you really want to be honest about it, President Obama never had the power to do that in the first instance, and he even said as much. He did it anyway because he felt the ends justify the means. It's a legal nullity. It should be gotten rid of, and Congress needs to take the issue up itself. If Congress wants to give DACA recipients amnesty, fine. I mean, I don't agree with that as a policy matter, but at least it would be done legally. But the president should not be doing that. Period. And this is where, again, if Biden is going to side with that, then again, as I was talking about in my previous video, this is somebody who does not believe in the rule of law. Because if he believes in the rule of law, he's going to look at that and say, you know what, maybe I do agree with that, but it needs to be done by statutory law, not executive fiat. The Constitution is very, very specific about who has what powers. The legislative power is vested in the Congress. The executive power is the power to enforce law is vested in the executive and the president. The president doesn't get to unilaterally rewrite laws just because he doesn't like the effect they have. And for those people who want to say that it's prosecutorial discretion, here's my response to that. Prosecutorial discretion is basically, I'll give you an example. Somebody gets a ticket in like in municipal court, and although you have facts that indicate that they really did break the law, like say that it's a speeding ticket, but say the reason they were speeding was because they were on their way to the hospital with somebody who was hemorrhaging to death. Technically, that's still a violation of the law. Now, depending on the specifics of the traffic law, maybe you have a defense to that. But let's say, for the sake of the argument, that you don't. That doesn't matter. It's a strict liability statute, and there's no necessity defense. That's what that would be called. The prosecutor has the ability in that particular circumstance, in the interest of justice, to say, you know what, fine, yeah, it's a law violation, it's just a valid ticket, but I'm going to dismiss it under the circumstances because of the particulars of why that occurred. That's prosecutorial discretion. What Obama did would be akin to a municipal prosecutor saying, I'm not going to prosecute any speeding ticket for any reason whatsoever. Or I'm not going to prosecute, for example, any speeding ticket against somebody who is speeding on their way to an important appointment. That's more like what Obama did, and that's not prosecutorial discretion. It's not. What that is basically rewriting the laws that because it has an effect you disagree with. Obama effectively created a massive carve-out from existing immigration law. It's not prosecutorial discretion. It's not. And to be honest with you, I think this argument isn't even the policy issue is almost tangential at this point because the bottom line is it's a discussion about should the president have the power to invalidate a duly passed and enacted law that was done within the Article 1 powers of Congress. And I would invite anybody listening to this to actually read Article 2 where the powers of the president. In fact, I'm going to pull it up right now. I'll pull it up on Google Scholar. That's actually a pretty good resource. There's some things I don't like about Google as a company, but Google Scholar is a great tool for research, and it's free. So I'm going to pull up Article 2. And there's another case, if I can find it, and I don't remember the site off the top of my head, but the effect of it essentially was it was involving President Eisenhower during the Korean War when he attempted to nationalize the steel industry because Congress wouldn't. He got slapped down for it, and this is the same kind of category of behavior. But let's pull up Article 2, U.S. Constitution. And we'll see what we find. Shall we? That's really annoying. Sorry, my browser is just being a dill weed. Well, that's not helpful. How about we just go to regular old Google? Because I got a bunch of case law there. It's actually, despite that, okay. I want the text of Article 2. That's what I want. Here we go. It'll be just a second. This thing is as slow as molasses. No, I'm not going to give you money. Okay. Article 2, the executive branch. Executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the vice president chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. This is electors, and I'm going to skip this. But president shall be commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. He may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices, and he shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the Senate concur, and he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. But the Congress may, by law, vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. The President shall have the power to fill up all vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of their next session. Section 3. He shall from time to time give to Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. He may on extraordinary occasions convene both houses or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such time as he shall think proper. He shall receive ambassadors and other public ministers. He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all the officers of the United States. Section 4. The President, Vice President, and all other civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment and for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, I think that the salient point is what's obviously missing from here. Nowhere in this does it describe amongst the powers of the president the ability to make law or to contravene duly enacted law. He has a lot of ability to appoint people, to appoint officers, to run the executive, but not to make law. What Obama did is attempt to make law. And if Biden's going to support that kind of an action, then he clearly is either unfamiliar with the concept of separation of powers as it's described in the Constitution, which I think per se makes him unfit for office, or he does not believe in separation of powers, which also per se makes him unfit for office, or he believes the ends justify the means, and that if you have a circumstance that's a noble enough goal or a dire enough circumstance, I don't know how you want it, which one is more appropriate to this, depends on, I guess, your viewpoint, then and then in that case it's acceptable to ignore constitutional law. In any of those scenarios, he is unfit for office. The point is, and it's right in the oath, that the president, and it's under Section 1 of Article 2, before he, that is the president, enter on the execution of his office, he, the president, shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. If he's going to support this, he's broken that oath without even having taken office yet. Either knowingly and intentionally, or negligently if he really is not familiar with separation of powers. So this is who you're looking at as a candidate from the Democrat Party. And I'm sorry to say, but the Democrat Party has gone on record repeatedly, members of the Democrat Party, basically arguing against strict obedience to the Constitution, against strict obedience to separation of power, against the rule of law. I mean, you have Hillary Clinton's little email snafu in 2016, and I know I mentioned that in my last video, and again, I think it's that important. For her to stand up in front of the country and tell the country that, yeah, she did that, she knew it was illegal, but you can't touch her because of who she is. And to say that, and for her to say, and her surrogates to say that it is sexist to expect that that law be enforced against her and to hold her accountable for that, is the height of lawlessness. Republicans are morons. I'm sorry to say, but the party, I'm not going to say everyone who is registered Republican. When I say Republicans, I mean the Central Party and the leadership are morons. And I think that to some extent applies to Trump as well. They're morons, and they're often very ineffectual. But you don't see at the same level Republicans sitting there saying, ignore the Constitution, just do whatever the hell you want. Because the ends justify the means. That's a Democrat thing. To the extent that Republicans have done that, I would have the same criticism as anyone who has that viewpoint should not be in office. But it isn't Republicans typically that are doing that. Republicans typically will support strict constructionist judges and will say, no, you really can't do that. Separation of powers. Federalism. It's more often than not Democrats pushing this idea that they can just do this. Well, and if you try to say, no, you really can't, then they'll sit there and want to say, well, it's good policy or blah, blah, blah. Or if you're arguing that, you don't care. I don't lack compassion for people that were brought here as children, and this is the only life they've ever known. I also will take it in this direction. That's an unfortunate situation, but it is not a reason to ignore the rule of law. The very foundation of this country is on the rule of law. And if the moment you start saying that it's okay to ignore laws that you don't like the effect of, is the moment that the rule of law breaks down. It's already broken down a lot when we have a de facto nobility class, and that's what the political class and the bureaucracy class in this country are, is essentially a de facto nobility class because they're not subject to the same rules as the rest of us. They're not. And if you don't believe it, you look at what happened or didn't happen to Hillary Clinton, what hasn't happened to Biden over his little business with Ukraine, and how about filling up little girls. You look at what hasn't happened to be honest, an awful lot of people who, or they get a slap on the wrist. They get to pay a fine. Maybe they do a couple of months in jail. But yes, we do in fact have a nobility class in this country. We just don't call them that. But if you vote for Biden, this is what you're supporting. Is this kind of lawless behavior. As always, I'm going to post links to stuff. I don't expect you to I don't expect you to just take my word for it. Oh, and I think I was going to pull up that case quickly. I see if I can find it. If I can't, I'll have to look it up later, and I'll probably post it in a future video. Let's see. Can we find it? I bet we can't. I'm never that lucky. Is this it? This might be it. No, this is not it. All right, I'm going to find the case later. I will definitely post a link to it at some future time. I think it's worth a read, and I may do a supplementary video to this one on this case, not to get into a lot of heavy legal stuff, but essentially it's dealing with a similar scenario where the president didn't like Congress's inaction and decided to go ahead and take action on his own unilaterally. And in that case, the Supreme Court took the position that inaction by the Congress is in and of itself indicative of Congress's mood and intentions, and it's binding. And the president doesn't get to unilaterally act if Congress has intentionally failed to act. I'm going to wrap this up. I've been harping on this a lot. Suffice it to say, I think that, again, this is another example of why Mr. Biden shouldn't be president. I think his immigration policies are fanciful at best, and at least as it applies to DACA, it's more evidence of the lawless attitude of him that he has. And no, he surely should not be given power if he is of the opinion that what Obama did was a good thing or even legal or acceptable, because it was not. It was not. And that's pretty much how I see it, is it was not anything that ever should have happened that way. If Congress wanted to pass the DREAM Act, that would have been Congress's prerogative. And that certainly was within the Article 1 powers of Congress. But with Congress not acting. The president doesn't get to make up his own laws and doesn't get to ignore duly enacting laws. Duly enacted laws. I'm getting tired and I need to wrap this up. The president does not get to do that. That is not prosecutorial discretion, as I explained earlier. It is illegal. Maybe illegal is not the right word. It is unconstitutional, and it is an abuse of authority. And it need that kind of nonsense needs to stop on all fronts. Or we do not have a free country when we have leaders, including the president, who are willing to ignore constitutional law. I don't care why. And we do not need to be electing candidates who think that that's okay. And that's the bottom line. And as I said in my previous video, if you enjoy listening to me rant, subscribe to my channel, share these videos, and like them, because I guarantee they're going to get buried. So anyway, that's all I have to say on that subject, and I hope you all have a nice 4th of July. Bye.